Hi everyone and welcome to this week's lecture, which is on analysis, and in particular we'll be talking about activity analysis and occupation analysis, and we'll be using those two words in slightly different ways to what we have been using them up until this point. Occupational therapy today has a long history in occupation analysis and activity analysis, and we're drawing on quite a long tradition of trying to understand what people do and the way they do it. Goes back to 1911, where there was a focus on trying to work out exactly what was the best way for workers to perform particular work tasks. And you may have heard of time and motion studies. The task back then was, very much focusing on a particular work, on a particular job or work, was to reduce to writing what are the steps or the motions involved, so that you could enumerate and list out and identify what those motions were, but also so that we could identify the variables which affected each motion, and that included things like what was it about the worker that made them do things in a particular way, what was it about the surroundings, and also thinking a bit more about the actual action and motions required. That developed back in around 1920, when people after the war were thinking about getting injured soldiers back into jobs. And excuse the language on the next slide, but it's very much of the time. And the focus was on the re-education of the crippled soldier, is the phrase used. And the task here was, or the message of this was, in considering any type of activity to which it is proposed to introduce the cripple, we first analyse this activity from the motion study standpoint in order to find exactly what motions are required to perform the activity and in what way these motions may be adapted to the available or remaining capable members of the cripple's working anatomy, or eliminated by altering the device or machine. So very similar to those studies of the job and time and motion studies about a decade before this, but very much focused on soldiers were coming back from the war with a whole range of impairments, and by understanding a particular activity or task, we could be able to match it to the difficulties that those soldiers were having. So here we are today, activity occupation analysis, and we're essentially talking about a structured, methodical way of understanding the who, what, when, where, how and why of what people do. What we need to spend a bit of time thinking about is just differentiating between activity and occupation. And to do that, we're going to use the work of Doris Pierce, who's an occupational scientist and occupational therapist in the United States of America, who's written a very useful paper called Untangling Activity and Occupation, which focuses just on this task, but really brings home what we mean by activity analysis versus occupation analysis. So she differentiates between two different concepts, activity and occupation, and does so in a way that's different to how we have done up until this point. Let's think of going for a walk to give an example of how to differentiate between activity and occupation from Pierce's perspective. If I say, let's go for a walk, or we're going for a walk, or we all went for a walk on the weekend, we all have an idea in our heads as to what that means. Okay, we all have a rough idea what that means. And so that is essentially what activity is from Pierce's perspective. So an activity is an idea held in the minds of people and in their shared cultural language. So we say going for a walk, that means something to us. We have a general understanding. We don't know the specifics of what that is for the person who engages in that, but we have a rough idea of it. An occupation, on the other hand, is a specific individual's personally constructed, non-repeatable experience of that thing. So we could talk about me going for a walk around the block for some exercise. That's my occupation of going for a walk, but will be very different from somebody others. So going for a walk, we all have a rough understanding of, but it could mean a whole range of things for different people. It could mean those two little people down in the right-hand side, going for a walk in the English countryside. It could mean going for a walk on the beach with your young child or niece or nephew. And although a bit of a stretch, it could even mean this for these soldiers. So thinking about activity versus occupation analysis using Peirce's perspective, we can analyse those things in slightly different ways. So we can analyse an activity to get an understanding of how it's typically done or how most people might understand that thing. And that'll give us a broad idea of the demands of that activity, the resources, the steps involved, etc. But then we can, if we want to think about a particular individual engaging in that, then we would do an occupation analysis and be much more focused in on that person. Why is that individual doing it? How does that individual do it? Where are they doing it? And so on. What we're going to do in class then is think much more about this. And in preparation for that, I want you to think about these few questions. So first of all, why do you think occupational therapists perform activity and or occupation analyses? What are some of the reasons why us as occupational therapists might need to do that? What are some of the benefits for us? Secondly, this is an easy, quick one. Could you use the Canadian model of occupational performance and engagement to perform an activity or occupation analysis? Do you think it's possible using that framework to do an activity occupation analysis? And then finally, if you did that, would there be anything missing? What would be missing from an activity or occupation analysis if you only used the CMOP? What I want you to do is make some notes on those three questions, and we'll talk more about those and also the implications for that when we're in class on Friday. Thanks, see you soon.